Hello grade 8s, this is Mr. Miller and welcome to lesson 6.1 on multiplying a fraction and a whole number. So before we begin with this lesson here, it's important for us to make sure that you have a little bit of background knowledge. So specifically, you need to know why 14/3 is equal to 4 2/3 and know how to switch back and forth between these. So this is an improper fraction and this is a mixed fraction, and so you need to be able to work with both of those. And you also need to know something about equivalent fractions and simplifying. So if you have a fraction such as 4/6, you need to be able to reduce it to 2/3 and know how that happens. So let's just take a look at those two items before we get into the lesson. So you don't need to take notes on this, you can just sit back and enjoy. First of all, let's consider this yellow hexagon and let's call it one whole. Therefore, the double hexagon would be considered 2. This blue diamond here would be considered 1/3. You can see that there are 3 of these making up one whole. And here we have a trapezoid, a red trapezoid, and it would cover half of the yellow hexagon. And so we've got 2 of those making up one whole. And then we've got over here some green triangles. And the green triangles are 1/6 each because it takes 6 of these to cover one whole. So as we're mentioning here, we wanted to know how you can switch from 14/3 to 4 2/3. Switch from an improper fraction to a mixed fraction, or vice versa. So what I've done is I've taken 14 of these thirds, and let's suppose I didn't know what it was equal to. What I could do is take one whole and cover up 3 of these thirds, take another whole and cover up 3 of these thirds, take another whole and cover up 3 of these thirds, and one more that would cover up 3 more thirds. So I can see that we have 4 whole plus 2 more thirds. So basically, when you are changing from an improper fraction into a mixed fraction, you want to know how many of these thirds, the denominator here, will go into the numerator. And you can see that it went in 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there were 2 of these thirds left over. So that's why we have 4 2/3. Next, we'd like to consider the other problem of reducing a fraction, such as 4/6. So when we have 4/6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 of these 1/6 tiles, we can simplify this by taking a third and putting it here, and another third and putting it right over top of those 2. And so you can see how the 4/6 becomes 1, 2, 2 over 3, 2/3, because we got half of the number of parts and the 6 became thirds, and that's because it takes half of the number of these blue diamonds to cover a whole, as it requires these green triangles to cover the whole. So that's it. Now, if you're looking to go the other way around, going back to our last example, taking a mixed fraction, getting an improper fraction, then what you could do is this. You'd say, well, for each one of these wholes, we can see that there are 3/3. So 3, 6, 9, 12, or in other words 4 times 3 gives you 12 thirds, plus 2 more thirds gives you 14 thirds. You should be able to go back and forth between these. And likewise down here, if you're going the opposite direction, to get 4/6 out of 2 thirds, you can multiply the top and the bottom by 2. Basically, having each of these thirds replaced by 2 of those 6 doubles the number of parts. So hopefully your background knowledge on improper and mixed fractions and also equivalent fractions and simplifying is a little bit more solid now, and we can move on to the lesson, which is about multiplying a fraction and a whole number. So if we have a single hexagon such as this representing one whole, then the multiplication that's being represented here is 4 times 1/3. As you can see that there are 4 of these, and each one of these shapes is 1/3. So we don't have all the pretty colors as we did on the other slide, but you get the idea. The shapes are still the same. So that gives you 4 thirds. So when you have a whole number multiplied by a fraction, basically what you can see, you've got a whole number that's multiplying a fraction. You can take that whole number and multiply it against the numerator. Right? So take this whole number and multiply the numerator, and that will give you what you have here. Well, specifically, 4 times 1 gives you the 4 up here, and you keep this as thirds. We're going to apply that same idea in the next one. So we've got 3 times 1/2, and this is 3/2. So, and again, if we're moving away from the drawing and just looking at how do we do this multiplication, if we've got a whole number times a fraction, then what can we do? And here's what you can do. So again, you want to keep it at halves. And if you multiply the whole number out in front here by the numerator, that will give you your numerator answer. So one more example like this. Here we have 5 times 1/6, and this will give you 5/6. So notice how the denominator remains the same here, but it is the numerator that when you take this whole number and multiply it by that numerator, you get the numerator of your answer or your product. So now moving away from the use of the hexagons as representing one whole. So you can see that we've got one whole that is divided up into 5 parts now. So that means that the shaded part here is 2/5. And if you have 2/5 times 3, then you get 6/5. Now 6 of these fifths, start doing a little bit of shading in here to indicate what happens. So we've got our 2/6. Now if we start putting these another 2/6 here, another 2/5 there, and then 2 more fifths, you can see that that 6th one goes into the next whole. And so we've got, in addition to one whole, we've got one more fifth. So you can write it as an improper fraction, but if you're looking to write it as a mixed fraction, then you can see what we get here. how about the next one? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 parts that are shaded in out of 6. And you can see that we've got that times 2. We've got 2 of these. So that means we have a total of 10 sixths. Now, it would be easier for us to deal with this if it were a little bit simpler. And we can simplify by dividing the top and the bottom by the same number. In this case, it's 2. And this gives us 5 thirds. And we can also write this as 1 2/3 if we want to have it as a mixed fraction. And finally, we've got 3 times 1 out of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3 times 1/8, and that is, of course, 3/8. So now let's take a look at another page of examples. This time we are going to determine the product using number lines. So what we're being asked to do here is to use basically an arrow diagram. So if we have an arrow, that would be handy. Let's see if we can. Okay, so let's get some blue, and let's make sure the shape is thick enough so it's easily seen. Okay, so let's make 1/3, and now let's just copy and paste. We've got, there's 2/3, 3/3, and 4/3. Whoops. Okay, so you can see that with 4 times 1/3, that will give you, of course, 4/3. And you can see that it's past 1 on the number line. It's 1/3 of the way to 2, so this is 1 1/3. So now likewise, let's do an arrow diagram to represent 3 times 3/4. So I'm going to take this arrow that we had used before, and I'm just going to stretch it out to make it a little bit bigger. So we're going to make it go all the way to 3/4. So now I'm going to copy and paste this one, and we're going to do, this is 2 times 3/4, and now we have 3 times 3/4. And so that is, we know that it's 3 times 3, 9/4, but we can also see here that it goes past 2, and we've got 1/4 of the way from 2 to 3. So now moving away from the all the diagrams and things like that, if we want to just determine each product, there is a way of doing this quickly. We've learned that now, that you can take the whole number, multiply it by the numerator, and that will give you your product. So this is 5/3. This one would be 15/8. If you want to write them as mixed fractions, you certainly can as well. 3 will go into 5 once, so the 3/3 is 1 whole, and then there's an extra 2/3. And in this case, the 8/8 will make 1 whole, and there are 7 more eighths, so this is 1 7/8. In the case of 6 times 3/10, this gives you 18/10. And so I do recommend that you simplify at this point, dividing the top and the bottom by 2, and this will give you 9/5. Now the 9/5 is greater than 1, so you can write it as a mixed fraction. So as a mixed fraction, 9/5 is equal to 1. That's 5/5, plus there are another 4/5 in it. Now I should mention that there is another way to do this multiplication to make it go a little bit more quickly. And that's if you can recognize that with 6 times 3/10, there is a factor of 2 that ultimately will be divided out between the 6 and the 10. So you could do 3 times 3 is 9/5 and have it simplified immediately. So the advantage of doing it this way is that first of all, your answer is already simplified. Secondly, the multiplication we're doing is 3 times 3 as opposed to 6 times 3. So we're multiplying smaller numbers. It makes it a lot easier. So I do recommend that you do that, if at all possible. Simplify before you multiply. Here's a case where we could do that. I can divide the 24 by 4, and I can divide the 4 by 4, it gives me 1. So now I have 1 times 6 is 6 over 1, or in other words, this is just 6. 2/3 of 12, well again, dividing this by 3, dividing this by 3, and I have 2 times 4 is 8 over 1, which is just 8. Oh, and by the way, I didn't talk about this yet, but it says determine each product. Of course, we understand that means multiplication in math. So a product, when it says of, understand that that means to multiply. Okay? So now 7/10 of 30. We divide this by 10, we get 1. Divide this by 10, we get 3. And 7 times 3 is 21 over 1. Or in other words, just 21. So again, if you had not done the simplification, if you just multiplied then tried to simplify, realize that what you end up with is 7 times 30 is 210 over 10. And so that deals with much bigger numbers. Then you have to simplify it, dividing the top and the bottom by 10. You would get 21 over 1. You'd still get the same result, but dealing with much larger numbers. So it's a good idea to simplify before you multiply. Alright, now taking a look at a word problem and how we can solve this using multiplication of whole numbers with fractions. Here it says there are 28 students in a class. 3/4 of the class takes the bus to school. How many students take the bus to school? Show your work. Alright, so if we have 3/4 of the class, which has 28 students in it, we're doing 3/4 of 28, or 3/4 times 28. Now you can divide this by 4 and divide that by 4 to make this a lot easier. You have 3 times 7 is 21 over 1, which of course is just 21. And so you can say that there are 21 students. So making a final statement here. Therefore, 21 students take the bus to school. Alright, and the last example here we're going to look at, it says a team won 5/8 of the 40 games they played. How many games did they win? So that means that we need to do 5/8 of 40, which does mean multiply. If I divide this by 8 and divide this by 8, then I get a lot easier multiplication to do. 25 over 1, which of course is just 25. And now you can make your final statement. So therefore, the team won 25 games. Alright, that's the end of the lesson. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks for watching this video.